The Dark Watcher. It was back in 1973 when David Parks, an experienced hiker from California, decided to explore the trails of the Santa Lucia Mountains. These mountains were famous for their breathtaking views and rugged beauty. But there was something else about them, something eerie. Locals whispered about strange, shadowy figures they called the Dark Watchers. David had heard these stories growing up, but he always brushed them off as silly folklore to spook tourists. Supposedly, tall, dark figures would stand silently on mountain ridges, watching hikers from a distance. People said the figures would disappear if approached, and some even claimed they felt an overwhelming sense of dread near them. To David, it was all just nonsense. He didn't believe in ghost stories, only in what he could see and touch. The morning of his hike was perfect. The sky was clear, and the air was cool and crisp. His plan was simple: hike to the summit of a lesser-known trail and camp overnight. By midday, he was high enough to see the ocean sparkling in the distance. The trail was empty, just the way he liked it. Solitude was his escape. As the afternoon stretched on and the shadows grew longer, David stopped to take in the view. That's when he saw it, a figure standing on a ridge about half a mile ahead. It was tall, way taller than a normal person, and completely still. At first, David thought it might be another hiker, but something about the way it just stood there felt off. He waved, hoping for some kind of response. The figure didn't move an inch. Probably just a tree, he muttered to himself, shaking off the weird feeling. By sunset, he had set up camp. He built a small fire, made a quick meal, and leaned back against his pack to relax. But he couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching him. Every now and then, he'd glance over his shoulder, scanning the darkness around him. Nothing. Around midnight, David woke up suddenly. His fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the clear sky was now covered in thick clouds. The wind had picked up, rustling through the trees. But it wasn't the wind that woke him. It was footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps circling his camp. "Hello?" he called out, his voice breaking the silence. No answer. Grabbing his flashlight, David pointed it into the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, but there was nothing, just rocks and shadows. Yet the sound of footsteps kept going, crunching through the dry leaves. His heart raced as he grabbed his pocket knife and sat near the dying fire, every nerve on edge. Then, silence. The footsteps stopped, and the stillness was almost deafening. David held his breath, straining to hear anything, a rustle, a snap, anything. And then, he saw it. Up on the ridge above him, the figure was back. It stood motionless against the faint glow of the moon. This time, it was closer, maybe 100 yards away. His flashlight flickered as he tried to shine it at the figure. It didn't move, but its shape seemed blurry, like it was part of the shadows themselves. And then, it started moving. It didn't walk, and it didn't run. It glided down the ridge in one smooth, eerie motion, getting closer and closer. David scrambled to his feet, gripping his knife tightly. The figure stopped just outside the circle of light from the fire. Now, for the first time, David could see it clearly. An unnaturally tall silhouette, wearing a wide-brimmed hat with faintly glowing eyes. "What do you want?" David shouted, his voice trembling. The figure didn't answer. It just tilted its head, almost like it was studying him. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it melted back into the shadows, leaving no trace behind. David didn't sleep a second that night. As soon as the sun came up, he packed his things and practically ran back down the mountain. For years, he didn't tell anyone about what happened, afraid people would think he was crazy. But when he finally did, he realized he wasn't alone. Other hikers, some dating back decades, had described seeing the exact same thing. a shadowy figure, always watching, always silent. Local historians say the legend of the Dark Watchers dates back to the Chumash people who believed in spirits that guarded sacred lands. Later, Spanish settlers spoke of los vigilantes oscuros, warning travelers to stay away from the mountains after dark. David never went back to the Santa Lucia Mountains. Even now, decades later, that night still haunts him. Was it just a trick of the mind? A shadow cast by the fire? Or did he really come face to face with the Dark Watcher? Lie or truth? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and drop a like if you enjoyed the video. Bye.